Welcome to Kitco News. I'm Niels Christensen. A lot of excitement in the precious metals markets. Gold prices trading at their highest level in 9 years again. Silver prices trading at 6-year highs. Here to talk about the price action in gold and silver and what to expect for the rest of the year is Carley Garner, founder of commodity brokerage firm DeCarley Trading. Carley, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Welcome back onto the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's fun to be here.
So much to talk about. My first question is actually from my leader, Daniela Camboni. On Twitter,
Okay.
she asked, what's more exciting, gold above 1840 or silver above $21? What do you think?
My perspective, I pay close attention to the gold to silver ratio, which is basically how many ounces of silver it requires to purchase 1 ounce of gold. In March and April, we saw that ratio jump up to 130, somewhere really honestly off the charts, something we had never seen before. And it's come back down quite a bit. I think the last I checked, it's around 90, but I still think there's room for that to move lower. A more comfortable ratio would be somewhere around 70. So, with that in mind, I think the fact that silver's starting to outpace gold, I think this is maybe just the beginning of that. And so I think silver's got to catch up to gold, or even even if the market doesn't necessarily, the metals markets don't necessarily continue higher, silver should outperform. So in other words, the ratio can go both ways. If the metals move higher, silver will probably outpace gold. If they move lower, gold will probably at least not fall as hard as silver will not fall as hard as gold. So that's kind of how we're looking at it. I do think in the short run, though, there is some room on the upside in both of them.
Well, I was going to say, so, but bottom line is in the ratio, silver kind of outperforms gold. Like it's the silver that catches up to gold, not
Sure.
gold falling down to silver's level.
Correct. That's how we're leaning in the short run. There's still some seasonal support for metals. The dollar, I still believe, is going to continue lower. So there's a lot of reasons that the metals will go higher. Also, I mean, let's face it, gold and silver are momentum plays. Once the train starts pulling out of the station, it's hard to stop. It's eventually, I mean, we've seen this happen in gold over and over and over. It eventually ends ugly, but that probably isn't going to happen right away. I think we've got a little room to move on the upside before we start having to think about that.
So what levels are important? I mean, we have a lot of people talking about all-time highs, or at least pushing to 1900 by the end of the year. How far do you think gold gets before, I like that, before it gets ugly?
Right. So for gold, I'm thinking the upside in gold is probably limited to about $100 to $150 from here, at least before we get a good correction, and then we'll have to kind of reassess things. Silver's in a completely different ball game here. Silver is nowhere near the 2011 high, and honestly, I don't think we'll see that 2011 high in my lifetime. Silver got up to $50 for those young kids that weren't around during that time. I doubt we're going to see $50, but I wouldn't be surprised if silver breaks resistance around 21.5, 22. If it can break and hold, I think we're probably going to see 26, maybe even $30 before it's said and done.
Oh, wow. So last time we talked, I mean, we were talking about silver. Right now you say momentum's driving this trade. What about industrial side? I mean, obviously, things aren't really going smoothly in the US when it comes to COVID-19. We don't really know how that's going to impact economic performance for the rest of the year. So I'm sort of wondering, I mean, how does that industrial side of silver impact this momentum trade?
So I think a lot of that is probably mostly built in. If you look at copper, copper also is a industrial metal, and it's performed very well. In fact, it's probably performed better than it probably should, considering what we're seeing going on in the economy and that sort of thing. But we have to also keep in mind that the COVID shutdown situation and the lingering effects are a little bit different in that consumers generally, at least now, this can change, but at the moment they still have money to spend. They're still spending that. We saw that with the retail sales number last month. So things are still moving. Just because people are sitting at home, doesn't mean they're not consuming. And so far that hasn't been a game changer. But again, things can change quickly, so we'll just have to kind of tab the boards and see how it goes.
So I guess, do you think this has a lot to do with the stimulus measures? I mean, everybody's sort of talking about this income cliff that the U.S. is facing. The $600 of related
Mhm.
to unemployment for COVID. If that doesn't get resolved, does silver come crashing down? Or like what? How does that impact sort of sentiment?
Sure. So, I mean, that would definitely be a big blow. I think that our the federal government has taken pretty dramatic action thus far, and so my guess is they're not going to just step away from the table and let things collapse. So, I think that they will kind of hopefully anyway, I think they will kind of taper down some of the money that they're throwing out there. That said, because silver is so far behind compared to gold, I don't believe that we're going to get a complete collapse in silver. Even if gold starts to struggle, silver will probably still maintain relative reasonable pricing. So I don't see any big collapse coming right away. I don't think that's played out, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Mhm. One of the big reasons for the rise in gold and silver is U.S. dollar fallen to 1 month lows, or their lowest levels since March. Do you think the U.S. dollar is now in a downtrend?
I do. I think we're still in the mid 90s in the US dollar. If you're looking over the last couple of years, that seems cheap. But if you look over the last couple of decades, that's actually pretty expensive. So I still think there's plenty of room for the dollar to move lower, especially given what our federal government's doing and what the central banks are doing. The US no longer really has an interest rate differential, at least not a material one. And until that changes, the dollar is probably going to struggle. And that should support metals prices.
So how far do you think gold can go? I mean, or how far do you think the U.S. dollar can go? Are you looking at 80s, 70s?
So for now, we see trend line support coming in around 93, which isn't too far from where we are. If it breaks below that, I think we're looking at mid to low 80s. So I know it seems crazy to talk about because we haven't seen that in quite a while, but it's doable.
But a few weeks ago, it was crazy to talk about, $21 gold, $21 silver, and
Right.
1850 gold. So yeah, I mean, it's just
Sure.
it feels like we're in this new paradigm shift.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one thing 2020 has taught us, we just never know what anything can happen. Anything's game. So.
And I guess what else are you looking at? I mean, obviously, like interest rates. I mean, a big part of this has to do with monetary policy. A lot of people speculating in September the Fed will introduce some sort of yield curve control. What are your expectations? And is this sort of the next step to drive gold? To your target, $100 higher or so.
Sure. So we do pay close attention to the treasury market. It has been a complete snoozer lately. I mean, we treasuries haven't done anything in months. We had like a really exciting March and then it just kind of flatlined. And so we're waiting for the next move. To be honest, treasuries generally go up this time of year. And because there's nobody's willing to step in front of the bus, I think they'll probably continue to creep up just a little. But we normally see a seasonal top in like the middle of August. So any trader that's looking for some sort of change in interest rate might start to think about that in a couple of weeks. That the market does tend to be seasonally vulnerable. And in addition, if you think about it, the U.S. yields are they're pathetic. The 10-year yield is around zero point 0.6 zero point 0.6 tenths of a percent. So I mean, honestly, you really are losing money putting your money in treasuries because of inflation and other things. And for 10 years, it just doesn't make sense for most people. And in this environment with stocks being relatively stable, again, it's hard to justify such a small yield, particularly when you keep in mind that there's really probably no upside potential. Like in previous years, people have been making money in treasuries, not necessarily because of the yield, although it's helped, but because of the capital gains. It's hard to imagine really any capital gains from here. In fact, we could see the exact opposite. So I know that people have kind of said this for years and it hasn't really worked out that way, but eventually we're going to get to a point where investors are going to realize they're not making anything in treasuries. It's all risk and very little reward. They might as well be parked in cash as opposed to the 10-year note or the 5-year note.
Well, or I mean, and gold. I mean, I think that's also what's making gold really attractive. I mean, we've seen gold and equities
Sure.
sort of rally together, which is really unusual. And I think that's because like as they're taking on equity risk, they need that hedge. And you just like you say,
Sure.
you can't get it with Treasury. So it to you, does it make
Mm.
sense to look at gold as that safe haven?
I think that's exactly what people are doing. I'm not sure eventually that is going to stop working. And they're not, the markets aren't going to send a memo and let people know in advance that it's time to rethink things. So it'll probably be a pretty abrupt repricing when it does happen. But for now, I don't think that's in play. Like I said, I think we've got a little more time on the upside in gold before things really start to turn the corner. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of money out there. The government has injected a lot of cash. It needs to find a home, and gold and silver have been a place for that money. So,
Carly, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you very much for your time.
thank you. Absolutely. It was great to be here. You're fun. Thank you.
For the latest in the precious metals markets, go to kitco.com. Stay safe and stay healthy.